Now, according to an appeal court in South Africa, former President Jacob Zuma was unlawfully given medical parole from a jail term last year and should return to prison to complete his sentence. Zuma, who's 80 years old, had been handed a 15-month term in June of 2021 for contempt of court. That's a move that triggered deadly unrest. But he served only 2 months before being given medical or parole for medical reasons that remain unclear. Parole was granted by the head of South Africa's prison service, despite an opinion by the service's medical committee that Zuma did not meet the required conditions. According to medical assessments cited in the appeal court's decision, Zuma has problems linked to high blood pressure, elevated levels of blood sugar, and lesions of the colon. Zuma, who's a prominent figure in the fight against apartheid, became president in 2009 and was forced to step down in disgrace by the ANC in 2018 following mounting corruption allegations. Well, a Zimbabwe lawyer based in South Africa, Simba Chitando, joins us, and you're welcome on Newsday. Let's start with the basics now. How was this medical parole unlawful?
The reasons, you have just touched on them, for why the Constitutional Court, it wasn't the Court of Appeal, well, it is a Court of Appeal, but it's the Apex Court, said that it was unlawful because the facts that were taken into that the decision was based were wrong, and for that reason, the court said that the administrative decision to grant parole was unlawful. Many of the facts suggest that a lenient decision was made, a decision that should not have ordinarily been made.
Now, Simba, we knew that the road to the ANC's conference in December would be colorful and eventful, but even this is a movie. We've already heard from the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, from the Jacob Zuma Foundation, and they're both speaking with one voice, and they're saying that it is highly unlikely that former President Jacob Zuma will return to jail. How likely is it that he will actually have to go back to prison?
Good question. The judgment by the court is very opaque. What the court has said is that the decision to grant parole was unlawful. But the former president has spent time in custody. So they've reverted the decision to the commissioner who will decide whether the amount of time that he has already served will be sufficient, and on that basis, there's a chance that you will not see any jail time at all. They've actually just said the decision was unlawful to grant parole, but the former president has spent time in custody, and they're going to take that period of time into consideration to decide whether he would go back to prison, go back to a custodial sentence. And it is very likely that the commissioner may decide to accept that the amount of time the former president has spent in custody is sufficient.
Well, Simba, I have to ask about the timing. You know, that now that we're hearing that this medical parole is unlawful, why is this coming up now as opposed to the time when it was assigned to him, especially taking into consideration that prison authorities have confirmed that 15-month sentence is over?
Yes, the timing is very concerning. The timing is concerning for the reasons, for one of the reasons you mentioned, the climate in the country. The current president of South Africa survived an attempt by some members of his own party to remove him on the step aside rule. They're saying that the allegations of corruption on his part and money laundering on the Phala farm that he owns is a reason why they believe that the current president should be removed. So there's internal rift within the ANC at the moment. So the timing, also considering the fact that on the same day, the murderer of Chris Hani the court decided that he would be released on parole. So a lot of South Africans are quite angry that former President Zuma, who is for a very light sentence, or light crime, if we want to put it that way, of contempt of court, has to go back to prison, but the murderer of Chris Hani is going to be released on parole. So you've got a lot of things taking place within the judiciary. Many black lawyers in South Africa are unhappy, and they're talking about transformation of the judiciary to ensure that more black judges make it to the bench, and judges that are aligned to transformation principles that's the ANC and Jacob Zuma promote. So we've got a lot. The country is, I would say, a little bit disturbed by the decisions that were made yesterday.
Yep, you've absolutely touched on the next point I was going to make, which is that unfortunate coincidence between this, this judgment being made on the same day that Janus Wallace is also being granted parole. Now, people are angry, and you've touched on the issue of transformation, but let's look at white monopoly capital. Is there merit to the anger that people feel that the justice system is captured by white monopoly capital?
It's very difficult to prove the thought process of any individual judge. It's very difficult to accuse a specific judge or a group of judges of being influenced by white monopoly capital, as many people call it. What has happened is several decisions have been made by the judiciary that are questionable. In the case of former President Jacob Zuma, he was convicted and sentenced for a crime without a trial. That is unprecedented. The Constitutional Court itself said that the process that they followed was unique, and former President Jacob Zuma went into these proceedings, criminal proceedings based on affidavits. And what was also quite troubling was the fact that his brother-in-law was the presiding judge, Judge President Zondo, and he gave evidence against him in a matter that he was presiding over. So that is unprecedented. It doesn't exist in any jurisdiction, that I'm aware of. I doubt it exists even in Nigeria or in the UK, Zimbabwe, where I'm from, or South Africa, where I practice. It's never happened before, where a judge gives evidence in a case that he's presiding over, and the accused happens to be his brother-in-law. That is a difficulty, and it's the reason why former President Zuma was found guilty of contempt of court, because he walked out of court because he was unhappy that his brother-in-law was the judicial officer in the matter. So we have a lot of questionable legal precedents in the judgments, in particular for former President Jacob Zuma, which have left many lawyers baffled. Myself, I'm baffled. I've never encountered a criminal proceeding where a person is convicted and sentenced without a trial. That is a problem. And the fact that the medical parole, former President Jacob Zuma is an elderly person. I do not understand how putting a person that old in jail is in the interest of justice. It's very unusual that other forms of punishment, such as a house arrest or a lighter, a fine, whatever it is, that the courts had available. They went for the jugular, and in that regard, I'm surprised by the court's findings.
And besides the fact that he's 80 years old, we know how much this cost in terms of lives that were lost when this, when this jail term was announced, 350 to be exact. But I'm wondering what legal options there might be to explore on Jacob Zuma's part in order to ensure that this call for him to return to serve the sentence that some are saying he's already served, that it's relegated to the background. Are there legal options for him at this time?
Well, the decision his lawyers will make is that they'll probably present patients to the commissioner dealing with the paroles and say that, look, he's already spent the time spent is sufficient. And let's put a line underneath this and end the matter. That's what, if I was his lawyers, I would do. And I think that is what the judgment suggests. It suggests that, the court said that we are reverting this to the commissioner to decide whether the parole was sufficient. Time spent was sufficient.
That's right. And of course, we did make mention to his arrest and the civil unrest that followed in those months and in those weeks after that. What's the current mood? Because I remember this time last year, or rather July last year, when he was arrested, it was, besides the looting and so forth, there was a very tangible tension in the country. How are people feeling? What's the temperature in South Africa at the moment?
South Africa, the tension in South Africa is very, very, very thick with anger. South Africa's, I would describe it as the most unstable it has ever been. It's unstable for just this matter which we're discussing. The sentiment is that the liberation heroes are going to jail. And many people who committed crimes during apartheid are not going to jail. In fact, the murder of Chris Hani has been released on parole, and the parole for Jacob Zuma being found to be unlawful. And there's the anger for that. There's also the anger towards foreign nationals. At the moment, South Africa is involved in a battle with Zimbabwean nationals within the country over the ZEP decision, and there's pressure on the South African government to return foreign nationals to their countries of origin. Bank accounts that belong to foreign nationals have been closed and attached. There's a lot of litigation in that regard that I'm personally involved in. I'm leading the case for the ZEP. So there's a lot of anger towards the white population. The Judge President of the Western Cape High Court, Judge President Hlophe, made some comments at the end of year function that it is time for black people to take the land back from white people. We are at a very, very tense time in this country. The white population feels threatened. Investors feel threatened. White investors feel threatened. We have a global recession. We have judgments that have provoked black members of the ANC in the judgment that took place against former President Zuma, and also the judgment for the parole of Chris Hani's murderer. So we have a cocktail of court decisions and court matters that have put South Africa on tenterhooks and in a very difficult time.
And as you're busy
Simba,
with the
Simba,
go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to ask you at this point, in the event that he's sent to jail to finish this sentence, what are your predictions from a legal standpoint?
I don't think you'll go to jail. His options would be, okay, make a presentation to the commissioner, say, time spent, he is unwell. That will be the first prize. The second thing, I'm speaking hypothetically, what I would do if I was his lawyer. And as a disclaimer, I actually am his daughter's lawyer. But what I would do is that I would say that time spent. The second thing, I would probably get a second medical report from another medical practitioner to show that the former president is unwell and he cannot serve more a custodial sentence. So if the decision was based on the medical information that they had before, what I'll do is that I'll get more medical information to assist the former president. That might be taking place as we speak. So that is the second option. There is the decision was made by the Constitutional Court, which is the apex court. You cannot appeal a decision from the apex courts. They're the highest court. So what I would do if the first two options are unsuccessful, I'll do what Dali Mpofu, who's a close friend of mine, and he is Zuma's lawyer in this matter, is apply to rescind the judgment, to say to the court, the same court, look, we think you made a mistake, and the reasons why we made a mistake are the following. So a lot of those decisions are in the hands of the lawyers that Zuma has briefed, but that is the avenues that are available to him. Go back to the court, say, we've got new information, and that new information may persuade you to find differently, because you can't appeal the decision. The other one is to go to the first one would be to go to the commissioner and say, this is an old man, he's already spent time in, and the time spent is sufficient, let him go.
All right. Now, earlier you made mention to the fact that you're leading the suit for the ZEP. Now, we all know Jacob Zuma as a liberation stalwart, is somebody who was, on broader terms, could have been argued to have been a friend of African nations because of his background. Now there's this sudden pressure, as you made mention to earlier, the xenophobic pressure. But let's look at the formal pressure from the immigration department, where all of a sudden the Zimbabweans who were granted special permit to stay are being pushed out without option to renew. Where are we with that case?
Great question, and it has come at a time when we were in court this morning. I suppose your news network will be one of the first to report this. The case is going to be heard on the 11th to the 14th of April next year. There was a hearing that I was involved in this before the Deputy Judge President Ledwaba. He set down the matter for next year. That just happened very recently. I've just come from. A few minutes later, Operation Dudula said that they want to get involved in the matter. Operation Dudula, the organization that are carrying out what the vigilante acts of xenophobic. I'll say vigilantes are normally people that uphold the law, but I'll actually call them more like terrorists who are attacking foreign nationals in South Africa. They want to get involved in the case. That took place about 30 to 40. So that is the update as what happened today. Insofar as your lead up to your questions, we are at a position where the new president feels bound to an element within the country's voter bloc. They call themselves Put South Africa First in Operation Dudula. They have been putting pressure on the ANC to get rid of Zimbabweans because of the largest group of African foreigners in South Africa. And also Nigerians and Somalians and other people within other minorities within South Africa. And the pressure when it didn't work at the last municipal elections, the ANC suffered because that pressure obviously didn't work. And the current president has decided, because he's being pushed by a large voter bloc within South Africa, want to get rid of foreign nationals, African foreign nationals. I keep repeating that because they're not targeting white.
Very nicely done. Thank you so much. Yes. Simba Chitando, Zimbabwean lawyer based in South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday, and thank you for your analysis.